In the forsaken heart of Dunwich, a town crumbling under the weight of its own decay, Elias Vardholt wandered through streets choked with weeds and shadows. Once a place of modest prosperity, Dunwich had long since surrendered to time, its buildings sagging like the bones of some ancient beast. Elias, a scholar of obscure histories, was drawn to this place not by chance, but by an inexplicable pull, a whisper in his mind that had grown louder with each passing day. His steps echoed through the desolate alleys until he stood before the remnants of the old library, its warped doors barely clinging to rusted hinges. The air was thick with the scent of mold and forgotten secrets, and Elias felt a shiver that was not entirely born of the autumn chill. Inside, the library was a labyrinth of dust and silence, its shelves bowing under the weight of tomes long untouched. Flickering light from his oil lamp cast grotesque shadows that danced across the walls, as if mocking his intrusion. Hours passed as Elias sifted through crumbling manuscripts and faded maps, his fingers blackened by the grime of ages. Then, beneath a pile of mildewed papers, he found a tome unlike any other. Bound in leather that seemed to writhe under his touch, its cover was etched with symbols that defied geometry, curling and twisting in ways that stung the eyes. The book was heavy, unnaturally so, and as Elias lifted it, a pulse of warmth coursed through his veins, equal parts exhilarating and disquieting. He could not tear his gaze away, though a voice within urged him to cast it back into the shadows. Seated at a splintered table, Elias opened the tome, its pages crackling like dry bones. The script within was alien, a jagged scrawl that seemed to shift when viewed from the corner of his eye. Hours bled into one another as he pored over the text, his mind alight with a feverish need to understand. The symbols resisted comprehension, yet they whispered promises of knowledge beyond mortal ken secrets of the stars, of realms unseen, of truths that underpinned the fragile veneer of reality. Elias scribbled notes in a trembling hand, unaware of the growing darkness outside, or the way the lamp's flame seemed to dim in the tome's presence. His heart raced, not with fear, but with a hunger he could neither name nor sat. That night, in the meager lodgings he had taken in Dunwich, sleep brought no respite. Dreams assailed him, vivid and alien. He stood upon a plain of black stone, beneath a sky torn by constellations that pulsed with unnatural light. Shadows loomed at the edges of his vision, vast and formless, their presence a weight upon his soul. They did not speak, yet their silence was a language of its own, conveying an indifference that dwarfed human existence. Elias awoke gasping, his sheets soaked with sweat. The afterimages of those impossible stars burned into his mind. The dream lingered, not as a memory, but as a wound, and he found himself drawn back to the library before dawn, the tone's call louder than ever, blurred into a haze of obsession. Elias abandoned all pretense of rest, his meals forgotten, his eyes bloodshot and sunken. The library became his world, its damp walls closing in like the jaws of some great beast. The tome consumed him, its pages yielding fragments of meaning that only deepened his fixation. He began to notice peculiarities. The symbols seemed to rearrange themselves when he blinked, forming patterns that hinted at cosmic laws no human mind could fully grasp. At times, he heard faint whispers not from the library, but from within his own skull, murmuring in a tongue that matched the tome's script. They were not words of comfort, but of invitation, urging him deeper into the abyss of knowledge. Week into his study, a former colleague, Thomas Merrow, arrived in Dunwich, alarmed by Elias's prolonged silence. He found Elias hunched over the tome, muttering to himself, his fingers stained with ink and dust. The air in the library was heavy, oppressive, and Thomas felt a chill that had little to do with the drafty windows. He pleaded with Elias to leave, to abandon the cursed book, but Elias's response was a snarl, his eyes blazing with a fervor that bordered on madness. "You cannot understand," he hissed, clutching the tome to his chest. "This is truth, Thomas, the truth of all things." Defeated, Thomas retreated, his warnings unheeded, leaving Elias to his solitary descent. By the 10th day, Elias's sanity began to fray at the edges. He saw things now, even in waking hours, flickers of movement in the shadows, shapes that vanished when he turned to look. Once, while tracing a particularly complex symbol, he felt a jolt, as if the tome itself had reached into his mind. His vision blurred, and for a moment, he stood not in the library, but in a void, surrounded by towering forms that pulsed with malevolent awareness. Their eyes, countless, unblinking, fixed upon him, and he collapsed, the floor cold against his cheek. When he awoke, hours had passed, yet the lamp burned as brightly as before, its flame untouched by time. Shaken but undeterred, Elias began a diario, scrawling his thoughts in a desperate bid to anchor himself. "Am I mad?" he wrote, "or is madness the price of truth?" The tome's secrets grew clearer, yet each revelation brought a deeper unease. Elias knew he stood on the precipice of something vast, something that could unmake him. Yet the hunger within him would not be denied. He resolved to press on, to uncover the full scope of the tome's knowledge, no matter the cost. As he closed his diary that night, the whispers grew louder, and the shadows in the library seemed to lean closer, waiting. Elias Varnholt's world had contracted to the confines of the Dunwich Library, a crumbling mausoleum of forgotten knowledge where the air grew thick with the weight of his obsession. The ancestral tome, its leather cover now familiar as his own skin, lay open before him, its pages a labyrinth of shifting symbols that seemed to writhe in the dim glow of his oil lamp. The dreams that had begun as fleeting intrusions now bled into his waking hours, each vision more vivid and disquieting than the last. He wandered through alien landscapes under skies that pulsed with unnatural hues, where formless entities loomed, their presence a silent judgment upon his frail mortality. These were no mere dreams, he knew, but glimpses of truths the tome promised to unveil. Yet with each revelation, a splinter of his sanity was pried away, leaving him teetering on the edge of an abyss that the symbols of the tome began to invade his reality. In the cracked plaster of the library walls, in the gnarled branches beyond the warped windows, Elias saw their jagged forms, spirals and angles that defied reason, hinting at geometries not of this world. He blinked, and they vanished, only to reappear in the flicker of his lamp or the grain of the table. His notes, once meticulous, evolved into frantic scribbles, filled with half-formed thoughts and sketches of the impossible. "The stars are not stars," he wrote, his hand trembling. "They are eyes, watching, always watching." The whispers that had once been faint now filled his mind, a chorus of voices speaking in the tome's alien tone. They did not command, but beckoned, urging him deeper into their secrets. Elias severed all ties to the outside world. The townsfolk of Dunwich, already wary of the library's shadowed reputation, avoided him, whispering of the gaunt figure who haunted its halls. His lodgings lay abandoned, his possessions forgotten, save for the tome and his diary, which he clutched like talismans against the growing darkness. Food became an afterthought. He sustained himself on stale bread and water, his body wasting, as his mind burned. At night, he spoke to the shadows, answering questions no one had asked. "Yes," he muttered, his voice hoarse. "I see it now. The veil is thin." The library seemed to respond, its walls creaking as if alive, the air heavy with a presence that watched and waited. After weeks of relentless study, Elias uncovered a passage that chilled his blood. The tome described a ritual, a sequence of runes and incantations to open the way to the infinite. It spoke of entities ancient, indifferent, vast beyond comprehension, that dwelled beyond the stars. To summon their gaze was to risk annihilation, yet the promise of knowledge was a siren's call. Elias hesitated, his diary filled with warnings to himself. This is madness. Turn back. But the whispers drowned out his doubts, and he began to gather materials: chalk, candles, a rusted knife from the library's debris. In the center of the room, he traced a circle of runes, each stroke precise yet trembling, as if the tome itself guided his hand. The ritual consumed him. He worked through the night, oblivious to the storm brewing outside, its distant rumbles like the growls of some cosmic beast. The runes glowed faintly, or so he thought, their lines pulsing in time with his heartbeat. Elias's mind wavered. He saw himself not as a man, but as a speck, insignificant against the vastness the tome described. The whispers grew louder, forming words he could almost understand, promising truths that would unmake him. He laughed, a brittle sound, and wrote in his diary, "If this is madness, let it be mine." As the storm drew nearer, the library seemed to pulse with anticipation. The windows rattled, and the air crackled with unseen energy. Elias stood within the circle, the tome open before him, its pages fluttering as if stirred by an unfelt wind. He began to chant, the words searing his throat, each syllable a violation of the natural order. The lamp flickered, casting shadows that twisted into shapes no human eye should behold. The air grew heavy, oppressive, as if reality itself strained against an intrusion. Then, with a sound like the tearing of flesh, the space above the circle split. A portal yawned open, not a door to another place, but to the vastness of the cosmos itself. Stars that were not stars gazed down, and Elias froze, his voice caught in a scream that never came. The infinite beckoned, and he could not look away. The library in Dunwich trembled as the storm outside roared with apocalyptic fury, its thunder a mere whisper compared to the cataclysm unfolding within the circle of runes. Elias Varnholt stood transfixed, the ancestral tome open before him, its pages glowing with an otherworldly light. The portal he had torn open in the fabric of reality pulsed above, a wound in the air that revealed not a place, but the infinite itself, a churning void of darkness, punctuated by stars that were not stars but eyes, countless and unblinking, belonging to entities whose forms defied comprehension. The air crackled with an electric dread, and Elias, his voice raw from chanting, felt his mind teeter on the brink of annihilation. The whispers that had haunted him now roared, a cacophony of voices speaking truths no mortal could endure. The portal, Elias beheld the cosmos in its raw, unfiltered terror. Vast plains of non-Euclidean geometry stretched into eternity, where time and space twisted into knots that mocked human understanding. Colossal shapes moved in the distance entities of such magnitude that their mere existence reduced humanity to a fleeting thought, a speck of dust in an indifferent universe. Their forms were not flesh, but something older, primordial, their outlines shifting like shadows cast by a dying star. They did not speak, yet their silence was a language of despair, conveying a truth Elias could not escape. The reality he knew was a fragile illusion, a thin veil draped over a chaos that had no beginning and no end. His heart pounded, torn between ecstasy at the revelation and horror at its implications. Elias's mind buckled under the weight of what he saw. He screamed, a sound lost in the storm's fury, his voice mingling with laughter that was not his own. The entity's gaze pierced him, their eyes like voids that drank his thoughts, unraveling the threads of his sanity. Memories of his life, his studies, his ambitions, his very name, dissolved like ash in a gale. He saw himself reflected in the infinite, a mode of nothingness adrift in a sea of eternal indifference. The tome pulsed in rhythm with the portal, its symbols now alive, crawling across the pages and onto the floor, as if the book itself were a conduit for the horrors beyond. Elias clutched his diary, scrawling fragments of his thoughts. The infinite sees me. I am nothing. I am all. Before the pen slipped from his trembling fingers, the library groaned, its walls bending inward as if reality itself recoiled from the intrusion. Elias collapsed within the circle, his body racked with convulsions, his laughter now a sob, his mind a shattered mirror reflecting only fragments of the cosmic truth. The entities did not move closer, yet their presence was a weight that crushed. His soul. He understood, in that final moment of clarity, the agony of knowing the infinite. To see the universe's true face was to see one's own insignificance, to grasp a truth that no mind could bear. The portal flickered, its edges fray indigena, and with a sound like the universe exhaling, it snapped shut. The library fell silent, the air heavy with the scent of ozone in decay. Days later, a group of Dunwich townsfolk, driven by rumors of strange lights in the library, ventured to its doors. They found them sealed, the wood warped as if fused by some unseen force. When they forced entry, the interior was a ruin, shelves toppled, papers scattered, the circle of runes burned into the floor. Of Elias, there was no sign, save for his diary, its pages filled with incoherent ravings and sketches of impossible forms. The tome was gone, as if it had never existed, though some swore the air still hummed with a faint, unnatural resonance. The townsfolk fled, sealing the library once more, declaring it cursed. In the weeks that followed, whispers spread of laughter heard in the night, a manic sound that echoed under moonless skies, chilling those who heard it. Elias Varnholt became a legend in Dunwich, a cautionary tale of a man who sought forbidden knowledge and paid the ultimate price. The library stood abandoned, its windows dark, yet some claimed to see shadows moving within, as if the infinite still lingered. Elias's diary, preserved by a curious scholar, was locked away, its pages too disturbing to read. It spoke of stars that watched, of a truth that devoured, and of a man who, in glimpsing the cosmos, was unmade. The townsfolk avoided the library, fearing that the veil Elias had torn might one day tear again, and the infinite would gaze upon them all.